Today we're going to be refinishing this table. It's got some blemishes that we don't like to see. So I'm going to have to sand this down and pour a new coat on top. Let's take a closer look. So you can see from this angle that it looks really nice. It's got a nice shine to it. We like the kind of mirrored look that it's got. But when you're pouring epoxy, sometimes you wind up making indentations where you don't want them, or you get weird bubbles. So you can see a couple of spots here where we made a mistake. There's a little tiny one right there. There's a big one over here. So there's a few blemishes that we need to take out. So we're going to sand it with an orbital sander. We've got 220 paper on there. And then I've got this little hand pad sander for the side edges so that I can match the contour of the edges without ruining them or without making them too flat and weird ways. See, like this spot especially right here. Now, if my goal was to finish sand this product into this kind of sheen, you know, eliminate these bubbles, not re-pour, I would sand this from 600 or 800 all the way up to about 3000, and that would eliminate these things down at the 600 level without eating too much into the material. And bringing it up to 3000 grit, you know, every step of the way, if you did it right, would give us this kind of look. So in this case, the table had some manufacturing defects and blemishes, but for the case of a scratch, the process would be the same. It would be sanding it down, getting rid of the scratch through the sanding process, and then re-pouring over the top. And with bigger blemishes like the ones that I have, or a scratch, you would start with a much lower grit, like 220, but not too low. You don't want to be gouging into it. All right, so I wanted to show you a little something here. By doing the orbital sanding first and the hand sanding afterwards, I created a little problem for myself that might not show up immediately, but might show up later. And you can see here, even after wiping away this debris, there's these little sideways lines here because the hand sanding scratched it sideways. Now I'm going to pour epoxy over the top of this in this final finish, so it'll probably erase these, but they might be slightly visible as like a ghost line. So if you do the hand sanding first, you don't run into this problem. But what I'm going to do is orbital sand it now to get rid of these by going over the edges just that one more time. If the table had suffered some kind of a damaging gouge, something heavy fell on it or something like that, you might need to go into some advanced detail work with grinding it out or cutting it at a 45-degree angle and softening the edges of that so that you don't see anything when you go to pour over the top of it. But for most light damage, this process works great. Okay, so here we have the table set up on some stilts and with a little gap and some protective measures put in place. You can see the sanding sheen on it here. That'll all completely go away once this thing is cleaned up and poured on top of. I'm going to go ahead and give it a good wipe just to make sure that there's no dust or debris. And then I'm going to pour my materials into the bucket. And I've marked the sides for where I'm going to pour it to. And then I'm going to stir it up and pour it on top and use this notched trowel to move the material around. I'll use a foam brush to paint the sides, just to make sure that everything gets completely covered. And you can see when I wipe it how much color comes back. And that's all going to be there when we pour this layer on. Right now the sanding job has diffused a lot of the light, which creates this kind of cloudy look, but it will become clear again with another coat. or with higher sanding grit. All right, so after that very basic wipe down to remove any remaining debris that may have fallen on it, I'm going to soak this rag quite a bit more, and I'm going to do a final wipe. For the final wipe, you don't go back and forth at all. It's a matter of one direction and you're done. Don't want to leave any debris behind. Don't want to leave any weird marks behind. Just want to get rid of everything you can. See that mark there? So I'll go over that spot again. And it's gone. Okay, now I'll let that dry and then I'll pour. So you'll notice that I poured out all of this material quite quickly. That is because it has very low working time, and if it's kept in that bucket nice and tall, it gets very hot very quickly, and it'll actually melt through the bucket, crack, and be hard as a rock. So I have to pour it out first, then get these sides covered. Okay, so it's the next day now, and this is now dry, but this material is not yet hardened up to the level that I want it. So I'm going to give it a few days, and epoxy gets harder over time, so I'm going to give it a few days before I move it around anywhere and try and sand the little bumps off of the bottom, which is the last step. But you can see how beautiful it turned out with its new finish on it. And here you can see the bumps on the bottom, which need to be sanded off, and that'll be the final step. The bottom already has a coating on it of a varnish. It could have anything, but varnish is just fine. And there you have it. That is how we go about refinishing a tabletop with an epoxy finish.